who better to kick things off on a show like this than the guy who is fixing to shake things to the core? Not with mild cuts around the edges, but real cuts that cut to the core. To our first and perhaps most obvious fix, acknowledge the magnitude of our spending problem and see it for what it is, the very core of our economic problem, a mission not for the faint of heart. And you'd think not a big selling point for a guy running for President of the United States. But in an age that politicians pander, say this of one Ron Paul, he's perfectly happy to level. He joins us right now. Congressman, we're doing things unusually tonight, but I think it's time, 2 years into this so-called recovery, almost to the day, we've got problems. Why don't people still acknowledge the magnitude of those problems?
I guess they still believe that government's going to take care of them, that somehow Congress will pass more appropriation bills and the checks will keep coming and the Fed can bail out everybody. They really believe it because in a way the deception continues because we are still running up debt and we're still printing money and foreigners are still taking our dollars. So it still works. But the other part of government being way too big and being able to really pay for it, that's where the problem is. We can't pay for it because we're not producers anymore. We only can borrow and we can only print money. And that's a dead end. And but as long as people will loan or as long as the printing presses run, we're going to drive ourselves into a much deeper hole. So this is not a bit of a surprise to me. You know, they talk about the potential of a double dip a couple years ago, and I kept thinking, well, maybe there'll be government statistics that'll talk about double dips, but there's one big dip that's been going on, and I think the big dip is actually started about 10 years ago with the standard of living for average people, good jobs going overseas, and people aren't getting richer. The people who had their stocks demolished over the past 10 years. So it isn't improving, but I think the basic problem is they never figured out why we got into this trouble.
Well, they haven't even figured out that spending hasn't fixed it. So, I guess what I'm asking you, Congressman, and this is a theme that I know you're running for president on, it's something that you and your son Rand Paul, the senator for Kentucky, have been raising. That is the notion of not only cutting spending, but hacking spending, substantially so. But even with the severe hacking both of you have looked at and proposed, it's relative chump change in the scheme of things. I think in your son's case, $500 billion off the bat in a $1.5 trillion deficit, that still leaves it at north of $1 trillion. That's how big our problems are. Yeah. And yet we don't even see how big our problems are.
No, and look how Paul Ryan got hit by making some suggestion too. But you know, I just think that maybe we word it incorrectly because it's always cut this, and cut this. Maybe if we said, well, we'd rather have the people spend the money, don't take it out of the economy, let the people spend this money. Because I do talk about, I don't put on the top of the list cutting health care. I put on the top of the list some of this foreign stuff. And I say, why shouldn't that money be spent back here by the people? And I think they can visualize this a little bit better. And literally that is what the case. We don't destroy wealth by stopping the spending by government. We produce more wealth because it gets into the hands of the people and better decisions are made. Because
but we don't do that. I mean, and I'm not blowing you smoke, Congressman, because whether people agree or disagree with you, no one can deny how ahead of the curve you were on all of this stuff. And I admire anyone who risks a great deal of wrath doing that sort of stuff. So my hat's off to you on that. But I do want to raise something that's just come in. Speaker Boehner has indicated today that he would like to see some sort of an agreement on the debt limit within the next month. Now, technically, we're supposedly at this brink in early August. How doable do you think that is, that we could score some sort of a debt accord within a month?
I think it probably will happen within a month or so. When they have to, it's going to be passed because they're going to intimidate and frighten and use a lot of fear tactics, and eventually they're going to do it.
But you've argued that it's not. I'm not saying it's not such a big deal, but that we sometimes treat this like the guy behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. It's just a dude behind a curtain in The Wizard of Oz, and that the fear is way disproportionate to the reality. So are you saying that you would risk, a government shutdown and even a potential default with this debt ceiling?
The way I look at it is if you don't get this under control, the risk is so much greater if you continue to do this, because you will literally destroy the currency.
So in other words, what we've been doing is what's got us in this pickle. Staving it off doesn't address that.
And we're going to, and we'll continue it. They're going to raise the debt limit, and they're going to continue it. But that, to me, is much more dangerous than saying, "Hey, let's cut it off. This level here, let's pay our bills as the money comes in." And the default is such a fake argument, because governments default all the time. We're in the process of defaulting now. All you have to do is say, is the dollar going down in value? Yes, prices are going up.
So let me ask you,
so the people are suffering from the...
I'm sorry to jump on you there, but our time's running short. So let's say we secure a debt deal that raises the debt ceiling by, what, 2.4 trillion, whatever they're talking about, without even the spending cuts that Speaker Boehner wants as assurances to offset that. What does the world do? How do the world markets react to that?
They probably short term will say, I guess we didn't have to worry. I mean, they're not all that panicked right now, because I think they're assuming that it's going to happen. So they'll take it in stride, and they'll just perpetuate all the problems, the spending and the borrowing and the inflating and the regulating, all the things that got us into trouble. That's what we're doing to try to get us out. And we refuse. Here, the policymakers refuse to have the correction. You can't get back to growth unless you get the correction out of the way, and we're perpetuating all the mistakes, the malinvestment and the debt. We don't allow this to be liquidated. And after a while, you can have recessions and recover for a while, but eventually you have a big bubble bursting, which we've had, and then it doesn't work. And eventually, the more they print, the less confidence they'll have, and the interest rates are going to go up. So I think it's much better to bite the bullet and say we've lived beyond our means. We ought to live within our means. We ought to have a sound currency and balanced budget. We need to have a system where we invite capital back into this country. We destroy the incentive to bring capital here. I mean, if you have a company and you have a lot of money overseas, you get taxed to bring it back. You get taxed again. And we punish our people who want to get capital back here and build jobs. So there's a lot of things we could do in the marketplace, and it wouldn't be more spending.